Good afternoon, everyone. So thanks for joining in. Though we are expecting more people to join in today, but since the time we are on time right now, so I think we'll start with the session, and others can join in as they connect. So we have with us Vijay today, and a lot of you already know him from the alumni meet we had last year. So he's IIM Indore alumnus from 2002 PGP batch. Plus, he's a founder and CEO of Storytrails India Private Limited, which is a very interesting start company, which tells stories about all the tourist destinations and what to explore, how to explore, uh, like that. And the webinar topic today is exploring India through its stories. So I'm personally looking forward to it as well. Over to you, Vijay.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you all hear me? Am I audible enough?
Yes.
Okay. Great. Thanks for joining me on this session today, Sunday evening. My name again is Vijay. I am a pass out of 2002 PGP batch. And for the last 12, 13 years, I have been running this company called Storytrails. We're based in Chennai. We have offices in a few other cities as well. And our work is to explore India through her stories. So our work is to research and dig out fascinating stories about everyday sites in India, not necessarily tourist landmarks or monuments. And these are stories about the local way of life, of customs, of symbolism, sometimes of architecture, sometimes about jewelry, mysticism. And for the last many years, our walking tours are highly rated. They've been rated #1 very frequently. And we also do audio tours. I'll just quickly take you through some of those details as we start. And I'll tell you what is in store for today's session. Feel free to interrupt me at any point. Just unmute yourself and ask me a question if you have to. I'm going to take you through a few stories. I think in the time we have, we'll probably be able to cover 4 or 5 stories. And there'll be stories spread out across India. And ask me a question if you have one, and I'll try and answer that to the best of my abilities. Yeah, so I'm going to share my screen, and we'll get started soon after that. Are you all able to see my screen? I hope you are.
Yes.
All right, so I was telling you about our company very briefly. We started 13 years ago, and we've conducted thousands of tours across multiple cities. We are in Chennai, Madurai, Pondicherry, Trivandrum, and Mumbai today, and coming to a few other cities very soon. The last many years, we've won quite a few awards. We've been consistently rated #1 in most travel publications, portals, and so on. We were awarded by the British Council. We got an award for being a creative entrepreneurship. A couple of years ago, we started a new venture where we tried to port all of our stories into a mobile application. So this is a new company that we set up, and it's live now. It's essentially a location-aware app where you download the app and you can explore a monument or a museum just using the stories that are presented there. So based on where you are in the city, the stories automatically get triggered. So it's live now at a few monuments in India. It's live at the National Museum, at the Egmore Museum in Chennai, at Qutub Minar, at Mahabalipuram, quite a few other locations. And it's a fairly state-of-the-art app. But what is unique to our format of presentation is the story-based content. So it's not really information about a landmark or a monument, but it's social stories that connect or that one can relate a monument with. And that's what we have in all these places. These are some of the tours. We have one tour in Singapore as well, and we're coming up with many more shortly. This is, of course, our reaction to COVID. The last few months, of course, most of our walking tours have been inactive, but we've discovered a new stream of services. We've discovered a new market. And over the last few months, we've been telling our stories to kids all over the world, largely Indian diaspora, and they've been going fairly well. So we expect to do a lot more of that work as well. So I'm going to get started with the stories today. I've tried and picked a few stories that take you across India. I'm going to start with a story from my hometown, Chennai. I don't know if you recognize this monument. This is the St. Thomas Basilica in Chennai. And I'm going to tell you a story about why I think this is a fascinating monument. Now, I'm sure many of you have traveled to Chennai, probably some of you are based here. And typically, when a tourist visits this part of India, the stereotypical suggestion is that, oh, Tamil Nadu is a land of temples, and there are so many temples that you can explore, which is true, which is very true. But what is usually forgotten is the other side of Tamil Nadu's history, or rather Chennai's history. And that's what I'm going to cover in this story. If I were to ask you, when did Christianity come to India? Typically, I think most of us would not associate Christianity with Tamil Nadu or South India. For most of us, Christianity is not the first religion that comes to mind when we talk about India per se. But do you know when it came to India first? I'll put that in perspective. The very first country that adopted Christianity as a state religion did that in 301 AD. You can actually unmute yourselves if you want to, because I'd love to hear your answers as and when you have one. Do you know which was the first country that adopted Christianity as a state religion? Anybody here? Which was the first Christian state in the world? I will get to that then. I hear someone's mic unmuted.
There are some answers on the chat room. Shall I read it out to you, or you can see them?
I can access the chat. Let me just figure out where that is. Yeah, there it is. Although I don't see any of the chat messages. Maybe you'll have to read it out to me.
So Praveen is saying Kerala.
Okay, I was talking about the first country that adopted Christianity as a state religion. You're right, Armenia is the first country. And it turned Christian in 301 AD, 301 CE. Christianity came to India in 52 CE. So the story is that Jesus Christ was crucified in 33 CE. And after he died, all his apostles, who were the closest disciples of Jesus, they all drew straws to figure out where each of them would go and preach. St. Thomas, he picked Asia, and his journey was a long one. So from the Middle East, via the Red Sea, into the Arabian Sea, he landed in Kerala in 52 AD. And it seems there he spoke of Christ and his life, and it seems the talks were really popular. People used to flock to listen to St. Thomas. And they say the very first churches in India were established in Kerala between 52 AD and 76 AD. Now, when I say a church, I'm not referring to a structure, I'm not referring to a grand monument. What I mean is a group of people who accepted Christ as a Messiah. And this group of people still exists in India. Today they're called Thomas Christians. And today they are believed to be amongst the oldest practicing Christians in the world. And they turned to Christianity between 52 CE and 76 CE. That is how old Christianity is in India. So it reached here 250 years before the very first country in Europe adopted Christianity as a state religion. So it's way older here than in most of Europe. In fact, in all of Europe. So what happened to St. Thomas? He reached Kerala, he found a following there, and many years later, he decided to walk across the peninsula. And he came to what is today Mylapore in Chennai, a neighborhood called Mylapore in Chennai. Here again, he spoke of Christ and his life. Here again, it seems his talks were extremely popular. They say the king of the land used to come and listen to St. Thomas speak. And it seems all this popularity got him a few enemies. One day when he was praying in front of a cross, they say somebody stepped up from the back, chased him, and stabbed him from behind. So St. Thomas is believed to have died in what is today Chennai in the year 76 CE. So here, if you go towards the airport in Chennai, you'll pass by a small hillock. It's called the St. Thomas Mount. And on top of that is an old church. That is where St. Thomas was killed, or believed to have been killed. After he died, his body was brought closer to the beach and he was buried there in 76 CE. For the next 1400 years, people generally forgot about St. Thomas. But every once in a while, Christians from the Middle East, largely Nestorian Christians, would come and revive memories of Thomas the Apostle. All this changed in the 1500s when the Portuguese got here. Now, the Portuguese, through the trade routes, had already heard that one of their saints was buried here, and they were very excited. They came here looking for the remains of St. Thomas, among other things, of course. They found what they thought were the remains of St. Thomas, and they built a small Portuguese church where the remains were found. That church existed there until the 1890s. Now, by the 1890s, that entire coastline, the entire coastline of Chennai, belonged to the British. And right in the middle of this British territory was a small Portuguese church. They couldn't have been very happy about it, but you can't bring a church down just because it is Portuguese. But one night, there happened to be a fire in the Portuguese church. Down came the Portuguese church and up came this very British structure. It's a structure that was built in the 1890s. It's today called the Santom Basilica. It was built with the status of a cathedral. And although it was built by the British, it is a Catholic church and a very popular one in Chennai. So the place may not be the most spectacular church you might have seen. It may not be the biggest church you would see, but it's extremely significant for a couple of reasons. One, it is one of the only 3 churches in the world which are built on the remains of an apostle of Jesus Christ. The others being the Vatican and St. James in Spain. So in that sense, it's a very, very important church. And Pope John Paul himself was here in the 1980s. He came and visited this church. The other reason why it is significant is because it also has a relic of St. Thomas. And I don't know if you've heard the phrase doubting Thomas. It's a phrase we all commonly use in English. That comes from a story that is depicted here in this panel. It seems in all of the Bible, there are very few references to St. Thomas. But in all those places, he comes across as someone who does not really believe in the power of Jesus Christ. So when Jesus was resurrected, he appeared to all his disciples and St. Thomas refused to believe. He said, "Until I touch the wounds on his body with my own hands, I will not believe that he came back to life." And Jesus, it seems, very obligingly allowed St. Thomas to touch his wounds, which is what is depicted in this stained glass painting. St. Thomas fell at his feet and said, "My Lord, my God." And Jesus said, "You have seen and you believed, but blessed are those who do not see and yet they believe." The basis of faith in every religion everywhere, you don't see, but you still believe. Ever since, the phrase doubting Thomas has come to refer to anybody who refuses to believe in the first instance. And what we have in this church, though, is a relic of St. Thomas. It's believed to be a piece of bone from his hand, the hand which touched the wounds of Jesus Christ. What's most interesting to me in all of this is the fact that Christianity has been here for 2000 years, which makes it a much older religion in India than in all of Europe. And in these 2000 years, there's been a lot of give and take. Many customs that you would associate with Hinduism here, you will see them among Indian Christians too, to different degrees in different denominations. What you see here is a chariot for Mother Mary. Everywhere else, you will probably see her in a blue robe. Here, she charms her devotees in a different sari every day. And outside churches here, you will see the same rows of shops that you would see outside temples. They'll be selling the same flower garlands, the same yellow threads. Just the trinket would have a Christian motive, but everything else is the same, more or less. So that's how significant Chennai is for Christianity and the evolution of Christianity in India. That's the first story. Do you have any questions? I see some on the... Great. So if there are no other questions on this particular story, I will move on to the next story. Except on my logo. No questions yet, except on my logo. What is the question? I see an elephant. Okay. All right. That's a quiz for all of you. Tell me by the end of this session, what do you make of the logo? What do you think that logo means? And why do you think it's relevant to Storytrails? Maybe by the end of the session, we'll come back to that question. All right. So my next story is about another city. Do you recognize this building? Do you know where this is? Anybody? Guruvayur? No, it's not Guruvayur. Anybody else? This is, again, a place in South India. I'll tell you shortly what this place is. But before that, let me ask you another question. Do you know which is the richest temple in the world? When I say richest temple, I mean the richest religious body in the whole world. Which is the richest religious body in the whole world? Yes, somebody has said Padmanabha Swami. You are right. Padmanabha Swami temple is what you see in the picture here. But let me throw some numbers at you first. The Vatican. The Vatican, with its worldwide following and historical treasures, has a net worth that is estimated to be about 15 billion US dollars, 15 billion US dollars. The richest temple in India, at least until a decade ago, was Tirupati. Tirupati in the state of Andhra Pradesh. And its wealth was estimated or is estimated to be about 11 billion US dollars. But then all of a sudden in 2011, an ancient temple in Thiruvananthapuram, it came into limelight. For centuries, this temple had existed very quietly, tucked away among lagoons and coconut trees, minding its own business. But then a person who was working in the temple, he complained to the court that the temple funds were being mismanaged. And the court, in all of its wisdom, it ordered that the temple assets be inventoried. So off went the auditors into the underground chambers where the temple walls were located, and were they in for some surprises. To begin with, they discovered that there were 6 walls as against the 4 that were originally declared. And when they entered these walls and shone their torches in, boy, were they surprised. They could not really believe their eyes, because precious stones and jewelry, they were just scattered all over the floor of these walls. Among other things, there was a necklace of pure gold, which was over 18 feet long. There was a huge golden throne, which was studded with diamonds. There were golden chains, thousands of golden pots, and many, many, many coins. Coins dating back to the pre-Christian era, some medieval coins, some Roman era coins, some dating as far back as 200 BCE. In all, it was estimated that there was over 1,300 tons of gold. And based on that, a ballpark estimate indicates that the value of the items found in the temple is at least worth over 40 billion US dollars. And that is just the material value. So many of these items are actually antiques, so they are quite priceless. So the question is, how did the temple come into all of this wealth? Where did this money come from? So Kerala has always been a wealthy state. Now, it has been trading with Arabia, with Europe, with Northern Africa for over 2,000 years. I'm not sure if you're aware, but the oldest church in India is in Kerala. The oldest mosque in India is also in Kerala. And Kerala used to be the gateway for new ideas, new philosophies, new religions to come into India. And the port was the entry point for most people before, of course, Vasco da Gama and the colonies. Because of spice trade, like somebody rightly says here in the comments. Yes, spice trade was the big thing. And there was a port, an ancient port called Euxodus, which no longer exists. But it was believed to exist until the 13th century. And that was a fabled port where all these ships used to come and land. Ships all the way from the Middle East, from Europe, and also from this side, from China. There were ships that used to come and dock here. So it was trading, it was very wealthy. And much of the excess wealth usually made its way to the temple, as often happens in India. Right? And also for thousands of years, the kings of the land have been donating or giving gifts to the temple. So the Cholas, the Cheras, the Pandyas, the Pallavas, the kings of Travancore. Again, let me ask you a question. Which do you think is the longest ruling dynasty in India? Which kingdom in India was the longest ruling dynasty? Any quick guesses? I've given out a few answers right now, but somebody says Cholas. Well, usually when I don't give out these hints, the answer that comes out is Mughals. And the fact is, Mughals did rule over a very large part of the country, but they ruled for just over 300 years. Can you think of a dynasty which ruled for 1500 years? Not the Kerala kings, as somebody says here, but it was not just one dynasty. So the Pandyas, who were ruling from Madurai, they were known to have existed at least as far back as the 3rd century BC. And they were in power even in the 12th century. So about 1500 years. Cholas also, who were ruling from another part of Tamil Nadu, they also were in existence for over 1500 years. They kept coming and going out of power, but they were in existence. At some point, they were just a small speck on the map. At other times, they were a very, very big kingdom. Pallavas didn't rule for as long. They were there for about 500 or 600 years. And then, of course, the Cheras. Cheras were the other dynasty that ruled from Kerala. So they were also in existence for over 1500 years. So if you see why South India has such a distinct family of languages, of gods, of culture, of customs, one big part of it is also because of the fact that the kingdoms here were more or less minding their own business, were ruling fairly independently of the north until almost the 14th, 15th centuries. So much of the culture was not as disturbed here as it was in other parts of India by other invasions. So anyway, all these kings used to donate to the temple. So that was another source of wealth. Even when a king lost in a war, when a new king took over, the royal patronage of the temples would still continue, because after all, these were their gods also, and rarely would a temple be brought down. So the power kept exchanging between the Cholas, the Cheras, the Pandyas, the Pallavas, but the temples remained intact. The wealth in the temples remained intact. Then between the 17th and the 19th centuries, many Hindu rulers who were seeking refuge from invading armies, they were often allowed to settle in Travancore, and they used these temple walls to keep their wealth safe. But then in 1750, something very significant happened in Kerala. So in 1750, on January 18th, the then king of Travancore, a man named Martanda Varma, he walked into the temple that day morning, and took out his personal sword, the symbol of his power. He placed it at the feet of the Lord Padmanabha Swami in the temple. And with that one act, he had effectively transferred the kingdom from himself to the god. After that, he took on the role of being an administrator. He continued to administer the kingdom on behalf of the real ruler, God, the Lord Padmanabha Swami, the deity of the temple that you saw in the picture. From then on, not just him, all of his successors also continued to remain administrators. I'm sure you've come across this tagline in Kerala tourism brochures where they call it God's own country. It's in fact almost literally true. Since 1750, Kerala has officially been God's country, and all of Kerala's wealth was God's personal wealth. It was stashed away in walls of temples like these, and it was rarely disturbed, rarely was it taken out. Wealth kept coming in and accumulating over centuries. Now, this transfer of power from the king to the god is a watershed moment in the history of Kerala. The name for it is Tripadvisor. That's what that act was called. And even the British, they recognized that God was the ruler of Kerala. So every time Lord Padmanabha Swami's statue went out in procession, they would accord the Lord a 21-gun salute, something that was offered only to friendly kings. And it's now over 300 years since this power shift happened. But even now, it is the Lord who continues to call the shots in Kerala. Not very long ago, a new airport was coming up in Thiruvananthapuram, and the king the, the, the king of the time, or rather the king in name of the time, very happily gave away some land for the airport to be constructed, but just with one stipulation. He stipulated that the biannual procession of the Lord that happens in Trivandrum, that should not be disturbed. Now, it so happens that the procession that happens twice every year has to cut through the place which is today the airport of Trivandrum, and it has to reach the beach on the other side. In fact, a new runway came up exactly on the procession route. So what happened after the airport came? Did the procession change its route? Of course not. So Trivandrum Airport is the only one in the world which shuts down for 5 hours twice a year for a temple festival. Kerala is clearly God's own country, and that God waits for no one, definitely not for aeroplanes. So it takes a complete shutdown, and the airport just closes for 5 hours twice a year because the festival has to happen. But this is part of local lore there. It's part of history. There's, of course, one interesting detail I've left out. Of all the vaults that were opened, there is still one more vault that remains unopened. The story is, of course, that vault, the doors of the vault have a symbol of a snake carved on it. And the priests swear that, if you open that door, terrible things will befall on Kerala. So nobody has dared to open that vault yet. Court case is going on, but of course, you know how those things can stretch for a long time. Sorry. Yeah, so that is the story of the wealth of the Padmanabha Swami temple. It is today, without doubt, the richest religious body in the whole world. And the assets are still being inventoried. There is a lot of dispute there. And the question, of course, is who does the wealth belong to? Does it belong to the people? Because they were the ones who gave it in the first place. Does it belong to the kings and the royal family? Because they were the ones who donated it to the god. Does it belong to the temple? Because it was given to them. Or, as is most likely, does it eventually belong to the government and the politicians? So we will know in time, but at this time, it's locked up in a legal battle. That's the story of the kingdom of Travancore and the Padmanabha Swami temple. Does anybody have questions? Or any other reactions, any other feedback? Do you want the story to be differently said? Do you want more details? Is this written down? What is written down? What are you referring to? Martana Varma, yes, it's very well documented. In fact, I would highly recommend the book by Manu Pillai. It's called The Ivory Throne. And it talks of many interesting customs that existed in Kerala in the Travancore kingdom period. One of those most fascinating customs has to do with the matrilineal system that used to exist in Kerala. I don't know if you know this, but in the kingdom of Travancore, if you were the king's son, you had no chance of becoming the king. And the king's wife was never the queen. And it all follows from the matrilineal system, where the kingdom or the property would go from father to his niece or nephew, to the nephew rather. The property and the succession, the royal succession would happen from the father to the nephew. The property would go from mother to daughter. So it was one of those few communities, few places in India, which followed a matrilineal form of succession. So it used to exist until the 1920s when that entire custom was abolished, but it was a very prevalent custom. And if you look at the lineage of, if we look at the royal succession in the kingdom of Travancore, you will see that it's king and his nephew, king and his nephew, king and his nephew, and so on. That's how it used to go. In fact, the king's wife was not the queen, and she used to live not in the palace, but in another house called Ammabeedu. So the king's son was not even considered royalty. So they would not attend any royal functions. The king would not be allowed to attend his own daughter's wedding. The king's children would not be, king's daughter would not be able to attend any of the funeral customs there. So that's how it used to be in Kerala. And I'm not saying it's good or bad, but that was the custom in Kerala for a very long time. Sorry, I see another question. Why does South India not have grand palaces unlike the North? Oh, absolutely they have. They have plenty of grand palaces. I am assuming that when you say grand, you are referring to one type of a structure. Most of the palaces that you will see in the north, uh, they follow a style that is called Indo-Saracenic. If you look at Rashtrapati Bhavan, for instance, or the Vadodara Palace, so they are a mixture of Hindu, Islamic, and British Gothic styles of architecture. South India has a different style of architecture. You'll see that in temples as well, right? So in North Indian temples, you'll see that the main shrine is taller than the entrance, whereas it's the exact opposite in South India. The entrance towers, what you see there, those are usually taller than the main shrine that house the gods. So it's a difference in architectural styles rather than temples being or not being grander in one place or the other. I'm trying to see if I can move. Yeah, that's the symbol of that's the motive of the Travancore Kingdom. That, by the way, is the palace, the Kaudya Palace of the Travancore Kings. It used to be outside Thiruvananthapuram in another place called Padmanabhapuram, and it's then shifted to Trivandrum. That's the story of Travancore. Any other questions? All right. If not, let me move on to the next story. I'm sure you all recognize the structure. And I have a feeling many of you might have at least a vague idea of this particular story that is about to come. It's not an unknown story, but I find it fascinating for many reasons, for many of the connected stories that come out of that particular incident. Now, today, Mumbai is a big city. There are 25 million people who live in Mumbai today. But the city of Mumbai may not even have come into existence if not for a wedding that happened 350 years ago. Now, that wedding changed the course of history. Who got married? That is what this story is about. Now, the Portuguese, of all the colonial powers, the Portuguese were the first of the Europeans to land on that coast of India. They landed in the early 1500s and they settled down in a place called Vasai, Vasin then and Vasai today. And very soon they monopolized spice trade between India and Europe. And things were looking really good for them. In the 1500s, in fact, Portugal was a superpower. It had a lot of power. It was a very powerful country. But then in 1580, Portugal was soundly defeated by Spain. And for the next 60 years, it could not even get independence. But by 1640, when Portugal got independence, the power equation had changed. And Portugal was no longer a superpower that it once was. And it was desperately looking for allies. What's the best way to find allies? Well, back then, and probably even now, the best and the easiest way was a wedding. So in 1660, actually, King Charles II of England, he was crowned as the King of England. And the very next year, he got married to a lady called Catherine de Braganza, who was the daughter of the King of Portugal. And to sweeten the deal, the Portuguese threw in a fabulous dowry. And that included over 300,000 pounds of gold. It included trading privileges in the East Indies, a lot of other things. Among them, one of the things given away to Charles was 7 little islands on the western coast of India. And these islands, the Portuguese had named them Bombay, meaning the good bay. Now, Charles II, he had absolutely no clue what to do with those 7 islands that were so far away from England. And for a short time, he tried managing these islands through appointed governors. Finally, he realized that these islands were probably not worth fretting over. And he decided to get rid of these islands. And he found a willing taker in the East India Company, the British East India Company. And that is how, in 1668, the British East India Company, by leasing out these islands from Charles, it got a toehold. And that became the start of the Bombay city that we know today. They paid £10 a year as a lease rental for what became the city of Bombay. But it was not the kind of city that you know it to be today. At that time, it was a bunch of islands which were not even connected, and they were not connected to the mainland. So there was very little that was happening there in those islands. But for the East India Company, this was a godsend because until then they were in Surat. And Surat was getting very heated up because the Dutch were there, the Portuguese were there, the Mughals were there, and life was not so easy for the British. So now they had a piece of their own land and where they could trade from. And they quickly went about building a city. And the key driver was a man named Gerald Ongier, who was a governor of the city, a British of East India Company. And he saw that the city was blessed with a natural harbor, and he decided to expand it. So custom duties were waived. Textiles very quickly became the big export from the city. Angier invited skilled merchants, merchant communities from all over the world. So very quickly, Parsis came and settled there. Uh, there were there were Gujarati Banyas who came and settled there. There were Baghdadi Jews, Armenians. All of them came, made Mumbai their home, and very quickly the city grew from what used to be 10,000 people in the 1660s to 25 million that it is today. Uh, Very soon after that, actually, Bombay became their headquarters. From Surat, they moved there. And there was no looking back for the city after that. And it all started with this lady, Princess Catherine de Braganza of Portugal. She did not simply bring a dowry, she actually turned a page in history for the city of Bombay. Sadly for her, though, it was not a very happy marriage. She had no children from the marriage, but Charles II, he had 12 children, all from his mistresses. So that was the life of Catherine de Braganza. But the structure that you see here, now this has, of course, an interesting story too. Um, India was not ruled by the British, but the British were in India for over 300 years. It was ruled by the British Crown for about 90 odd years. And in that time, the only British monarch who came to India was King George V. He came to India in 1911 with his wife, Queen Mary, to see India and experience her legendary opulence. And the British government of the time, they saw in this an opportunity to show the Indian kings who the big boss really was. So the British government decided to hold a darbar, a coronation of the king. 1911, by the way, was the year the capital of India shifted from Calcutta to Delhi. So King George came here for the coronation. And the British government first thought we should have a ceremonial gateway to welcome him. Unfortunately, by the time the permissions came through, uh, they came through only in 1924, I think. And it was 13 years after the king came and left the city of Mumbai. So what did he see when he landed there? He actually saw a giant cardboard replica of the Gateway of India. That's what was installed for his visit. The gateway, the real gateway, actually came up 13 years after he left. But when he came here, when the king came here, like I said, the British government said, let's hold a darbar and let's invite all the Indian kings to this darbar. And it was a gathering like no other. Dozens of rich and powerful Indian kings coming with their king-sized egos. Remember, some of these men were amongst the richest people in the world at that time. And obviously, some protocol issue had to crop up, and it did. So the British government decided that at this gathering, nobody but the British monarch could wear his own crown. Now, it's no secret that Indian kings love their bling, and the more powerful the king, the blinger the crown. How do you tell these rich and powerful kings that they could not wear their crowns in the presence of King George V? So the British came up with a devious plan, clever plan. They came up with a new headgear, called it the sarpej, and they positioned it as the chic new thing that kings could wear. They gave it to all the kings who were invited. At that gathering, the only king who actually wore his crown that day was King George V. Let's talk about the crown that he wore, King George. Now, Britain has some very interesting customs. One of those customs is that the crown jewels never leave the shores of England. So how do you have a coronation without a crown? Easy, you create a brand new one. And the British government created one sparing no expense. It seems over 6,000 diamonds, rubies, emeralds, sapphires, they all went into the making of what is today called the imperial crown of India. And King George wore this on that particular day at the Darbar, and it's never been worn since. It's been safely stashed away in the Tower of England. The best part of the story is the diary entry in King George's diary. At the end of the day, he writes in his diary, "This crown gave me a headache." So that's the story of King George and his fancy crown. And of course, the story of how Bombay came to be. Any questions? I'm actually not able to see the chat questions. Anybody has any questions? Otherwise, we'll move on to what I think might be the last story for today, or maybe we might have time for one more. So we're going to a different part of India again. We're actually coming closer to Chennai. Anybody knows where this picture is from? Let me just see if I can see the chat. I'm not able to write. I can't. So anyway, this is the Shore Temple in Mahabalipuram. It's a collection of monuments which date back to the 7th, 8th centuries. These are some of the oldest temples you will find in India today. In fact, if you visit Mahabalipuram, you will see the evolution of temple building in India. So from the earliest rock-cut temples and inscriptions to what used to be called cave temples to structural temples like this. All of this is on display at Mahabalipuram. Many historians think this was like a workshop for these sculptors to experiment with temple building style. This, in fact, is the very first, probably the very first instance of a temple which was created by placing stones one on top of the other. Until then, most temples used to be carved into the rock face, or they used to be gouged out. They would gouge out rock from a hillside and they would make a temple of it. So these were some of the earliest structural temples, and they're all. This one is by the shore. It's called the Shore Temple. Beautiful monuments. You'll see many of them in Mahabalipuram. Most of them are about 1,300, 1,400 years old. That's a lighthouse in Mahabalipuram. But my story is about a monument which is on the outskirts of Mahabalipuram. And Mahabalipuram is a fantastic showcase, and I particularly like some of these stories because they tell you how many things evolved in South India, from languages to religion, of how things evolved here differently from other parts of India. And I'm going to tell you the story of the evolution of some of the gods. There are actually many fascinating stories. I have picked this one from this particular monument. This cluster of monuments is called the Tiger Cave. And it is on the outskirts of Mahabalipuram, as I said. This particular monument is called the Athirana Chanda Cave Temple. And this also is about 1,300 years old. And these, by the way, are some of the oldest inscriptions you will find there. The one on the left is believed to be the oldest Devanagari inscription in South India. And again, there is a fascinating story here of how languages and scripts evolved in these parts. I won't get into that now, but this is another view of the Shore Temple. These are the 5 rathas. They're called the Pandava rathas that you will see in Mahabalipuram. This is, of course, a very famous bas-relief. It's called Arjuna's Penance. Now, coming back to the monument I was talking about. So that monument is fascinating for this particular sculpture that you see here. Now, it's a cave temple, and inside you will see a stone lingam that you see in front of you. Behind that is this panel. This panel shows a figure of Shiva, the god of destruction, his wife Parvati, their son Muruga, and behind them are Lords Vishnu and Brahma. Now, this was a very popular icon during Pallava times. This icon was called Somaskanda. Sa is for Shiva, Uma is Parvati, and Skanda is another name for Muruga. And you will see these kind of motifs all over Mahabalipuram. Now, if you're familiar with Indian gods at all, you will immediately realize that somebody is missing from this family portrait. Who do you think is missing?
Ganesh.
Ganesh is missing. So why do you think Ganesh is missing from this sculpture, which was created 1,300 years ago. Why would such a prominent god be missing from the sculpture? Because many historians will tell you that at the time the sculpture was carved in Pallava territory, Ganesha was relatively unknown in these parts ruled by the Pallavas. How do they know? So some historical evidence, some conjecture. Ancient Tamil literature dating back to the 3rd century BC, it's called the Sangam period literature, that talks of 5 big gods in Tamil Nadu. There was Vishnu, who was the god of forests. There was Indra, the god of coastlands. There was Varuna. There was a goddess called Kotravai. And the biggest of them all was Lord Muruga, who was the lord of hills. Shiva was conspicuously absent from this list. In fact, the earliest reference to Shiva in South Indian literature, or at least literature from these parts, comes only from the 5th century CE. Things were like that for a long time. And then between the 7th and 9th centuries, there was this group of poets called the Nayanmars. Now, these poets wrote prolific literature about Shiva, in praise of Shiva, songs and poems. And it so happened that that was the time when the Pallava kings were at their peak. Pallavas then adopted Shiva as their main deity, and they built spectacular temples for Shiva in their capital city, Kanchipuram. Most of those temples still stand. And those are some of the earliest temples for Shiva in Pallava territory. What about Ganesha? Now, when did Ganesha first start getting worshipped in these parts ruled by the Pallavas? A clue for that comes from a popular devotional song. If you know Carnatic music, or if you've heard Carnatic music, there is a very popular song called Vatapi Ganapati. Story goes that in 741, the Pallava king Narasimhavarman I, he defeated the Chalukya king Pulakesi II. And the story again goes that the brave general of the Pallavas, he saw an idol of Ganesha there. This was in the Chalukya capital of Vatapi, which was called Badami until recently. I think it's still called Badami unless they've changed it back to Vatapi. But Vatapi, this general found the sculpture. He took it back with him to his hometown in Tamil Nadu, a place called Tiruchenkattanpudi. He installed that idol there. And that idol is believed to be the earliest evidence of Ganesha worship in these parts ruled by the Pallavas. That said, of course, Ganesha was already a popular god further down south in the kingdom of Pandyas in Madurai, around Madurai. So that is the evidence, that is the story that many historians go by, because frankly, there is no other evidence which says Ganesha was a known and popular god in these parts before that time period. Any questions? I'm sorry, if you have questions, you'll have to speak up because I can't see the chat for some reason. If you type something in the chat, please say it out loud. Are we doing okay on time? Every?
Yeah, Vijay. So my question, Vijay, I have one question. So this is not related to this question story itself, but in general, the architectural style of the temples in India, South India, is very similar to what we have found in Cambodia or in Malaysia, in that region. So what is the story about that? How those things are linked?
Well, they're linked because those ideas, those philosophies, those architectural styles went actually from Tamil Nadu.
Okay.
You don't hear of many seafarers among Indians, on the lines of Christopher Columbus and Vasco da Gama. But during the 10th, 11th centuries, the Cholas were a very big naval power. Their territories extended all the way to what was Srivijaya Kingdom in Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, that belt. So they took over those kingdoms, a lot of ideas, and like I said, ideas of religion, of gods, of Hinduism. They all went from here to those parts. Many of the names that you will see there, they're all Hindu names. Many of the temples are all Hindu temples. So all of that went from here. And then, of course, other waves happened. So when the British were here, a lot of the Chettiar community, they went along with the British. They were the merchant community, they were the trading community, and they were the financiers, the money lenders. So they went and they set up their base in places like Singapore, in Malaysia, and so on. And they went with their gods. So many of the temples that you will see today in Singapore, Malaysia, they are temples to village gods. They're not necessarily temples to Shiva and Vishnu. Those gods are also there, but you will also see temples to goddesses like Mariamman, Pechiamman, Veeramakaliamman. And these are unlike, they look very unlike most gods that you might be used to. They are very fearsome looking gods, very scary looking gods. And these were village gods who traditionally had this role of protecting the village against diseases like smallpox. They were the guardian deities of the village. So you will see many of these gods in temples in Southeast Asia. The temple styles, of course, are a straight lift from what you see in South India.
And even in Angkor Wat temple, that also has Chola influence?
I am not very sure of the dates and the timelines, but I'm pretty sure there is a great connect.
Okay.
By the way, so all these stories that I'm telling you, I'm telling you these stories not from the point of view of an expert. I'm not a historian. I am not an expert in any of these matters, but I'm a sucker for stories. I love juicy, gossipy stories about everyday life that tells us something about our past, of our history. And I collect these kind of stories, and me and my team, of course, has people who are more better versed in history than I am, but these are stories I've collected. So there will necessarily be gaps in my understanding of history. But I hope you like the stories and dig out a lot more about these subjects.
Sure.
All right, so we are at 4:55. Do we have time for one last story? Do we? Okay, I'm going to take that as a yes. And I'm going to tell you one story which is not from history. It's not about a monument, but it's about a custom that we all see around us. So a big part of the stories that we tell on our trails, they are about everyday sights that you see on the streets. Why do you remove footwear outside a temple or a house? Why do you walk in a clockwise direction in a temple? What does that arati symbolize? Why do people wear bindi? And this is a question that almost always comes up on our walking tours. And we tried digging around for an answer to this question. And we found not one, but many different stories which explain a custom as common as why we wear a bindi. Any answers here? Do you know why we wear a bindi? In the interest of time, I'll just go ahead with my answers. Like I said, there are many answers. Some people will tell you that it's like an evil eye, a mark that wards off evil. Some people will tell you that it's like a mystical third eye of Shiva, a third eye that allows you to see things that are not visible to the other two eyes. If you speak to somebody who knows yoga, he might tell you that he'll go into probably a deeper explanation of how our body constantly gives out energy. It's called Kundalini that rises from the base of your spine. And this spot is considered to be an outlet for this energy. It's called the Agni Chakra. And they say you wear a bindi there to cool that spot and retain that energy within you. It's a little profound for my taste. I like a much, much simpler story. Nothing wrong with any of these stories. I'm not saying they're right or wrong, but I like the story of the bindi being a caste mark. Now, long time back, the Brahmins, who were the priests, right? So they wore a bindi mark on their foreheads. Again, for those of you who are not so familiar with this idea, if you're born a Hindu, you're born into a caste, right? You can't change your caste. You can't say, I want to opt out. You're there and nothing can change it. Back in those days, the Brahmins who were the priests, it is said they wore a white mark on their foreheads to symbolize the purity of their professions. They were all teachers. The Kshatriyas, who were the warriors, they wore a red mark on their foreheads. The Vaishyas, who were the traders, wore a yellow mark for prosperity, while the Shudras, who worked for all the other castes, wore a black mark on their foreheads. Now, it would be okay if things were as simple as that, but in India, with a long history, we love complicating these matters a little bit. So it seems there was a division. Soon there was a division among the Brahmins. Some were worshipping Shiva. the god of destruction. Some worshipped Vishnu, the god of protection. Shiva worshippers started wearing horizontal marks, like the one you see in the picture here. And the Vishnu worshippers started wearing vertical marks on their foreheads. It didn't end there. The Vishnu worshippers, there was another subdivision and two new designs cropped up. One which looks like a U and another one which looks like a Y. Now, to many of us, these are subtle differences, but to a believer, these are extremely significant differences. Not too long ago, there was a dispute in a temple in Kanchipuram, which is about an hour from Chennai. And here in a temple, a Vishnu temple, the priests, who were all Hindus, who were all Vishnu worshippers, who were all Brahmins, they could not agree on whether the temple elephant should wear a Y or a U on its forehead. So they argued about it, and then the matter went to court. The court gave a verdict. Clearly, one side was not happy. It went to the High Court. And from there, it went all the way to the Supreme Court of India. And the Supreme Court, in all of its wisdom, it ruled that 1 year the elephant will wear a Y, and the next year it will wear a U. True story. And this settled the dispute, and they followed this till the day the elephant died. So I'm not sure if it explains why we wear a bindi, or if it is at all the reason why any of us or any of our family members wears a bindi. But it is a true story. It is a fascinating story. And it tells you something about how seriously some of us might take some of these customs. So it is true of all our customs. We realize that there is never a right or a wrong story. There are just many different stories. And our work at Storytrails has been to dig out such stories and present them through walking tours and learning experiences, and of course, audio tours that we started recently. So with that, I'll come to the end of today's session, and I definitely invite all of you to check out our website, check out our social media handles, check out our audio tours, and write to me when you can. Tell me what you think we should be doing differently. And if you're in Chennai post-COVID, I hope you will come and check us out, check out our walking tours as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Vijay. That was very interesting. All the stories that were very interesting. Anyone else has any question? Praveen is asking about the logo. Yeah.
Oh yeah, we'll come back to the logo. So what do you see in the logo? Do you see, I'm sure you see an elephant, right? And you see an elephant with a howdah on top. Can you make that out? So that is that's another way of saying trails. But if you look at it another way, it's also a single apostrophe. It is a single inverted comma. That is the part which depicts story. So that's story trails. That's what our designer came up with many years ago. So that is what is depicted in the logo. Does that answer your question? Right, I'm assuming it does. Is there any other question that I can take?
So a lot of thanks is coming in the chat box, but I don't see any question in particular.
Great. All right then, so with that, I'll close the session and thank you all for joining in. And I hope you found the session useful.
Thanks, Vijay. Thanks a lot.